The Australian Financial Review.
Hello, I'm James Thompson, Senior Chanticleer columnist at the AFR. Welcome to our weekly news breakdown of all things business, finance and markets. With me today is not Anthony McDonald, who's on a well-earned break, but the Financial Review's editor, Cosima. How are you, Cosi?
I'm very good, James, and I'm thrilled to be making my debut on your podcast. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Well, this week we ask what Prime Minister Anthony Albanese got from his big China trip. We examine Matt Comyn's blueprint to fix Australia and look at why the boss of the National Australia Bank is under such heavy scrutiny. Cosi, let's start there. On Tuesday, the AFR dropped a bit of a bombshell when it revealed that investors are unhappy with the leadership style and strategy of NAB's CEO Andrew Irvine, including the fact that he's been known for socialising with NAB's big customers. Now, NAB's the country's leading business bank, Cosi, and business banking's all about relationships. Is this such a big issue?
Well, James, it's quite ironic, really, that the key skill that probably made Irvine such a success and got him the top job as CEO is now proving a little bit problematic for him.
Yes.
You know, as you say, banking is a relationship game, and Irvine was clearly very good at it. You wrote, I think, earlier this week how he attended the wedding of one of his clients' children, which shows just how close and personal his relationships are. Yep. But look, CEOs are held to a different standard. Now, maybe Andrew's client relations helped him get the top job, but now he actually is the CEO. He's sort of got to operate in a different way.
Yeah.
It's actually interesting to me, James, that here at the AFR, we haven't had any official denials of the story, which makes me wonder if some in NAB are pleased that this is public knowledge, that it puts Irvine on notice to be a little more statesmanlike and less of a good bloke to go to lunch with.
Yeah. I think the other thing here, Cosi, is the bank is sort of under genuine pressure from its shareholders. It's really heavily owned by fund managers. So NAB's got the highest fund manager ownership of all the big four banks. So these guys have got a real stake in the game. And I don't think it's just about socialising or anything like that. It's really about strategy. So you'll remember, Cosi, that NAB's CFO, a guy called Nathan Goonan, he left suddenly in May, and it's still a bit of a mystery as to why he left. And then we've got a new head of business banking at NAB, a guy called Andrew Orbach. He's landed from Canada. He's an old colleague of Andrew Irvine. So again, the market's just not sure about that. And the other thing, Cosi, right, is that everybody is coming after NAB's patch in business banking, aren't they?
Yep, they certainly are.
Yeah, and this has been a real issue for NAB because the margins are good in business banking. It's their heartland. It's always been their heartland. And so Irvine's got enough on his plate without having to worry about this stuff, right?
Absolutely. And I would also argue that maybe if everything was going swimmingly at NAB, these concerns wouldn't have even surfaced.
Spot on. Yeah, that's exactly right. So, let's see where they go. I think Irvine's been overseas. The chairman, Phil Cronican's been overseas. Everyone will be back in the country next week. And I imagine they be looking to get back to business, I reckon.
Well, and one of Andrew's first tasks of business is appearing at the ABA conference early next week. So he'll be out in public, which should be interesting.
The Australian Bankers Association have got a big annual thing. So I think that session might be pretty well attended, Cosi.
I would suggest so, yes. Now, James, this epic battle between Donald Trump and the world's most important central banker just seems to roll on and on and on. Where has it got to this week and why does it even matter?
Well, yeah, poor old Jerome Pal, who's the chairman of the Federal Reserve. I guess you might say he's the equivalent of Michelle Bullock at the RBA. He must be wondering, whether he's going to keep his job, because it looked for about an hour on Wednesday night that he was packing his bag and walking out the door. There's been this sort of campaign by Donald Trump against Powell. Trump wants interest rates to be lowered. He wants them to be lowered dramatically. He would like them to be 3% lower. And where, Treasurer Jim Chalmers and Anthony Albanese are very, very careful not to tell the RBA to do anything, Trump is just giving it to Powell with both barrels. He's on social media calling him a knucklehead. He's calling him too late Jay Powell and basically running a campaign against him. Everybody's worried that we're going to see Powell sacked. and a Trump appointee will come in and look to cut rates. Why does it matter? Well, it matters because if rates come down when they shouldn't, what we'll see in America is inflation jump up. That'll push up the cost of money. Bond yields and the yield curve will go up. And that will eventually flow through to the cost of capital, not just in America, but all around the world. And that could have lots of ramifications. It could spill over onto the share market and push share prices down. So what happens with Powell has suddenly become really important, Cosy. And it's like this, I don't know, it's like two wrestlers in the ring, you know. Poor old Jerome Powell, you know, he's got to sort of be statesmanlike and careful. He's fighting with both arms tied behind his back, and Donald Trump's just whacking him every day. So it's pretty unseemly, isn't it?
It is. Do you think Trump will ever make good on his threats to fire Powell? And even if he doesn't, is he doing enough damage anyway?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, the funny thing is that Powell's term as chairman ends in May next year. So Trump can wait him out quite easily, and then he could do another thing, and that's appoint the next chairman, say in, I don't know, September or August, next couple of months. And so then Powell would be sort of a lame duck. Yeah, working with this shadow chairman over his shoulder. So that would be, you're totally right, that would be enough to really wear down the Fed's independence and wear down Powell immediately. So it's pretty unseemly. Remember last year we had that big blow up when we had the story that Jim Chalmers had rung Michelle Bullock about, and suggested that it would be, asked a few questions about rates. I mean, that's nothing compared to this, isn't it?
No, that seems very tame compared to the way things are carried out of the US at the moment.
Yeah, and a good thing too. All right, Cosy, let's move to our first topic. And a few weeks after missing out on that meeting with Donald Trump, Anthony Albanese travelled to China for a state visit that was, well, as Albo himself said, the full kit and caboodle. He met US President Xi Jinping. He met Chinese steelmakers who buy all our iron ore. He went to the Great Wall of China like Gough Whitlam. And of course, Cosy, he went and visited the pandas.
On everyone's bucket list.
That's right. And it all seemed very friendly. It all went off pretty well. But, Cosy, do you think this trip was a win for Albo? Did he really get anything out of it beyond sort of smiles and handshakes? Or is that not a bad thing to get smiles and handshakes in a time when the world's pretty tense?
Look, I've got to say that, PM spending a week in China seems like a fairly long time. But he's described the trip as constructive and, quote unquote, an important step in developing the Chinese-Australia relationship. And look, he's probably right on that level. This trip was all about strengthening economic ties with our biggest export partner, and as we like to say, stabilising the relationship. So we had, talk of modernising the free trade agreement. There was that big CEO roundtable. There were some tourism agreements signed, and as you said, we got to go to the pandas. But now the other thing is that Xi treated the PM to a very grand banquet in this, room with many beautiful chandeliers hanging.
Right.
And our Foreign Affairs and Defence correspondent Andrew Tillett described it, who was there, described it as a carefully choreographed display of goodwill. So, if it's all about making the relationship look a little bit better, spending some quality time, some FaceTime together, definitely tick those boxes. And there were probably a few incremental steps in terms of trade, nothing groundbreaking, but that was good. But there was also a bit of an undertone to this trip, right? And the big elephant in the room is the security relationship and the US. And that's something that there was a bit of friction beneath the surface about. So, you had the Prime Minister raising concerns about the flotilla of Chinese warships that circumnavigated Australia earlier in the year, and Xi pushing back and saying, well, we were well within our rights to do that. You had different interpretations of things that were discussed. The PM said he restated Australia's position on Taiwan, that he wants to maintain the status quo, but then the Chinese media reported that he told Xi Jinping that Australia was opposed to Taiwanese independence. So, and then there were other things that weren't even raised, such as the PM's election promise to force the Chinese owners of the Port of Darwin to sell the assets. There was, On the surface, smiles or goodwill, but there's still a lot of tension beneath the surface.
Yeah, no, good point. It's amazing. I mean, Andrew Tillett's been great on sort of bringing us some of the choreographed moment. I think he had that great headline, a succulent Chinese meal isn't the answer to everything.
Exactly.
And our producer, Alex Gow, who, Cosi, I don't know if you know this, is an ARIA award winner.
I did. I'm very impressed with his side hustle.
Yeah,
maybe this job is his side hustle.
Absolutely. He pointed out to me earlier that the PM had a house band, a Chinese house band who played covers of Paul Kelly, Powderfinger and Midnight Oil. Now, how good would have that been?
Oh, well, I don't know. Would it have been good? It would have been interesting.
It does strike me, though, as someone did their research on Albo and, very much playing to his character.
Yes.
One thing back at home, Cosi, is the opposition has been going on. They've been trying to find something to go on about this trip. And the one thing they've landed on is that Albo still hasn't met Donald Trump. And they've been banging on about this. It's fine to meet Xi, but Donald Trump is the relationship that really matters. Do you think there's something to that? And I guess, is there any chance that the US will be grumpy with anything they've seen on this trip?
Well, I think it was really interesting that the day the Prime Minister turned up in China, we have leaks coming out of the US that Senator Eldridge Colby, who's leading the review of AUKUS, has said to Australia, would you back us in a China-Taiwan conflict? So suddenly Albanese lands in China. We're caught in the middle between our biggest sort of economic partner and our biggest security partner. And I think that was a curiously timed leak to just sort of put the spotlight on the difficult position that Albanese and Australia finds itself in between these two sort of dueling powers. I think, look, the opposition is obviously trying to find a criticism point. It is a concern that, we have yet to have a meeting with Trump because in one sense, we have less visibility on where that relationship is at compared to our relationship with China right now, which is an interesting change of events, right, compared from a few years ago. So while we're a little bit in the hands of the Trump administration, so you can't blame Albo that he hasn't had that meeting and that he's gone to see Xi first. Xi is an important relationship, but there's a stark contrast with the fact that we still haven't been able to sit down with Trump, and we have no idea what's going to happen with AUKUS. We don't know how he sees us. We have no idea if, they're going to sort of look after our security in the region. So it's relevant that they raise this or point this out. Yeah.
And we don't even know if Albo did get a meeting with Trump, how grand would the banquet be? Would it just be cheeseburgers?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Maybe he'd enjoy them. Now, James, a key meeting during this trip was with Chinese steelmakers and the big iron ore miners, BHP, Rio Tinto, Fortescue, and Gina Rinehart's Hancock Prospecting. What was at stake in this meeting?
Yeah, it's really interesting how the amount of importance that was placed on this. And, Andrew Forrest, the executive chairman of Fortescue, was there. I think he called Albo bro as he shook his hand, which I thought was pretty funny. But this was a serious meeting because you were at our mining summit in Perth back in May, and Andrew Forrest really made a big stir.
He did.
By coming into that room and basically saying, we all think we're sitting pretty, that China will buy our iron ore forever. I'm here to tell you that's not the case. And what's going on here is that China is slowly moving away from a steelmaking technology called blast furnaces to a steelmaking technology called electric arc furnaces. Now, that change is about reducing the carbon emissions from the steelmaking process. So electric arc furnaces basically emit less carbon, and they do that by eliminating the use of coal in those processes and by using slightly cleaner iron ore. Now, that's where the problem comes in for Australia. Forrest says what we produce in the Pilbara, it's not quite clean enough and good enough for these Chinese electric arc furnaces. And he's saying we need to cozy up to the Chinese and make sure that they keep buying our iron ore one way or another. So I think Rio and BHP and maybe Hancock, they're a little bit more sanguine. They're sort of saying, hang on, Forrest, this is a change that's going to take 4 decades. So, we've got time to sort this out. But I think Forrester's probably won the day here a bit. You know, Albo came out of that Steel meeting and was talking about green iron. He sounded a lot like Andrew Forrest, I thought. So
He did. Been drinking the Kool-Aid with Forrest.
Yeah, but that was an interesting recognition, I thought, at least, Cosy, that Albo recognises that you can't take this for granted. The Chinese aren't just going to buy our iron ore because we produce it. We actually have to sort of try. We have to make a big effort. And I think that's what this meeting was about, making a big effort.
Do you think it was successful?
Oh, hard to say. I mean, my sense was everyone came out of this meeting and sort of smiled and said, yes, very important relationship. We love your iron ore and Australia loves selling it. But I think if you're Andrew Forrest and the other miners, the idea that you get the Prime Minister in there advocating for iron ore, I mean, as he should, it's a big part of his tax base. But I think that's probably pretty important. That's probably a tick, I would have thought.
Yeah, it's quite a powerful endorsement.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of Rio Tinto, James, the company announced a new CEO this week. Who is he and what are his writing instructions?
Well, he's the guy we thought was the favourite, an Australian, a West Australian actually, which is good because that's where Rio's heartland is in the Pilbara. A guy called Simon Trott. Again, he was one of the stars at the mining summit in May. He spent 25 years at Rio Tinto. He's a miner's miner. You know, he's been, in the last 5 years particularly, he's turned around Rio's iron ore business. I mean, you saw him on stage, Cosy. He's pretty thoughtful.
He is.
He's not a sort of brash, big talking guy. He's pretty considered and down to earth, and he's from a family of sheep farmers in Western Australia. I love that story, Cosy, that Peter Kerr, our mining guru, had when the family farm that Simon Trott used to work on, back in the 80s, his parents installed air conditioning in the shearer's shed. And everybody said to his parents, you're mad, this is really expensive. But the way Simon Trott tells it, his parents had figured out that this was a way to make sure that the loyalty of the shearers and the productivity of shearers, they stuck with them. That's exactly right. So I thought that was a lovely little anecdote from Simon Trott. But I think, ironically, his writing instructions at Rio are going to be to slim the place down.
Yeah, okay.
There is a view inside Rio that it's become just a bit bloated. It's a bit sort of top heavy, too much investment in the functions around the business and not enough focus on the operations. So my sense, Cosy, is that Simon Trott is the guy who's going to come in and maybe not wield the axe, but wield the scalpel in a considered way to unlock some value for Rio Tinto over the next couple of years. So be interesting to see how he goes. Rio told me this week that the fact he's Australian has nothing to do with his appointment, Cosy, but I reckon this will be really well received here.
Totally, 100%. I mean, it's one of our biggest companies and we've got one of our own running it, right?
Yeah. Well, let's see how he goes, but I think we're in for a little bit of a period of change at Rio Tinto. They got a lot going on. They got this, as well as the Pilbara, they got this big iron ore mine opening in Guinea. It's called Simandou. So Trott's got a fair bit on his plate and we'll see how he goes.
Okay, James, let's move to our second topic. And this week, preparations for Treasurer Jim Chalmers' great productivity roundtable went up a notch with the release of a bunch of submissions to an inquiry the Productivity Commission is holding as part of Chalmers' big push. Now, James, one of the most interesting submissions was from Commonwealth Bank. Why did it stand out and why won't everyone be happy with it?
Because I reckon one of the reasons it stood out is because they were one of the few companies to make a submission.
Completely right.
Obviously, we got submissions from all the usual lobby groups, but CBA put together a very detailed submission, and I am reliably informed that Matt Comyn, the chief executive, he was very, very, very closely involved in putting this submission together. And Cosy, I reckon you can see that because it talks to the things that he's been saying, on stage and in public for a long time.
Yeah.
I reckon there's two sort of things to emphasize here. One is that we always struggle with what's the definition of productivity. Why does it matter?
Yeah.
And I thought this submission did really well in that Comyn made the point that The problem Australia's got is that the next generation is going to have worse living standards than their parents and for some of them, their grandparents. So, more expensive housing, higher taxes, less economic growth. And what we need to do is get more from less so we can lift living standards for that group of people.
With your kids and mine.
Your kids and mine. It's such an obvious pitch. I just wonder why politicians haven't grabbed it.
Yeah.
Like productivity is about making life better for your kids and grandkids.
Yep.
That's it.
Totally.
That's why please get on board with us. Why won't some people like it? Well, because Comyn went out there a little bit with lots of sort of interesting ideas on tax reform. The big one, I guess, was that he said a cut to the company tax rate is not important. It's not a priority. We need to do other things. And his view there is that because of the aging population, we're going to have a smaller group of workers who are supporting the rest of the economy, and we can't make things unfair or unequal for them. So we need to look at other things. Those other things include the GST. So do we need to raise the rate of consumption taxes? Do we need to think about wealth taxes? Do we need to think of capping the amount of money that people can put in super to access those tax concessions? Now, none of these are fringe ideas, but it's interesting that Matt Comyn would come out with them, that Commonwealth Bank would put them to the forefront of their submission.
Oh, completely. And I mean, to your point about the most surprising thing, CBA saying that they don't think cutting the company tax rate is a priority from our biggest bank, our $300 billion company. It's quite interesting. But yeah, I think a couple of things, James. As you said, not many companies have specifically put in their own submission to this. They have let the lobby groups do it. So kudos to the Commonwealth Bank and Matt Comyn for doing this. It's good to actually have a point of view, have a position, not leave it to the lobby groups. And dare I say it, it's probably more powerful,
Yes, great point. Yeah, absolutely. Now, Cosi, and it's interesting to see the role that Comyn's playing here. Like, as you said, he's running our biggest bank and lots of influence comes through that. He's on our power list every year, and so he's almost a walk-up start for that. But he's clearly confident enough in his position that he's willing to come out and share these ideas about public policy. As you say, good on him. We need people to do that. But it is interesting that he's prepared to step into that role.
Oh, look, James, I find Matt Comyn's increasing positioning himself as the Oracle of Australia so fascinating. And as you say, it's only kind of happened over the last 18 months or so that he's sort of found his own voice. And look, from my perspective, it's refreshing to have a chief executive who's prepared to put himself out there and make a significant contribution to the national debate, and potentially say controversial things. It's so much better than the talking points and glib sound bites that we often get.
Yeah.
And as you said, that's, why he's always on our power list. And last year we made him one of the AFR's Business People of the Year because he's prepared to put his voice out there. And I think the first time we really realised that Matt was moving into this sort of role was at the AFR Banking Summit last year, and he kind of went off piste in his chat, and we all sort of sat up and paid attention because he said, the government needs to get bolder on tax policy, and then he basically pulled out this piece of paper where he'd scribbled all these ways that you could, simplify the personal tax system. It was so great. We were all like, it was very exciting times for the AFR.
Very AFR moment.
and then a few months later, he's down in Canberra at a parliamentary inquiry, and he calls out the populist politics that we were starting to see. Which again, good on him for standing up and not playing it safe behind closed doors. And as you know, James, Matt is also a big AI evangelist, which, he loves going over to Silicon Valley. He loves talking about, the potential of the technology. And that's also really good, I think, for Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. So Comyn's clearly interested in the future of Australia, but, there is a bit of self-interest there too, because if you think about Commonwealth Bank, it's basically a leverage bet on the Australian economy. So
Totally.
Commonwealth Bank wants to see the next generation of customers be able to come through and be able to borrow, be able to save, be able to start businesses, do all those things. So he's thinking about the future of the bank as well as the country.
Yeah.
I think the other thing here, Cosi, is Common's also got a great relationship with the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers.
He does. It's a bit of a bromance.
Yes. And I thought the shift in Chalmers' attitude this week was really interesting. Like, we had a leak out of Treasury that sort of half suggested that taxes will need to rise to improve the budget sustainability. And Chalmers seemed almost happy to have that out there. Like, he was happy to have that out there as a talking point. I'm relaxed about that. Let's chat about it. And then even with the GST, he's been very firm on saying no changes to the GST. And this week it was, well, I still don't want changes, but look, let's have the chat. Let's have the discussion. I mean, what's going on here? Is this just the honeymoon period after the election win?
I actually am struggling to know what Chalmers' real position on the GST is, because there has been a bit of flip-flopping. When he first announced this roundtable and he got asked about the GST and he said, look, I don't want to rule anything in or out, but historically I've been against it. And then, last week the Prime Minister was asked about it and he said consumption taxes are regressive. That's why this doesn't fit part of our reform agenda. Then this week Chalmers is like, well, maybe. But then he subsequently said, well, actually, I agree with the PM. Our views are known about the GST and they haven't really changed. So, but then you have the business community, many players saying we've got to look at the GST. We've got to look at this tax. We've got to raise the rate potentially. We've got to broaden what it applies to, whether that's fresh food, whether it's private school fees, whether it's health. There's a lot of people saying if we're serious about tax reform, the GST, which hasn't been touched for 25 years, needs to be part of this. And whether Chalmers feels a little bit conflicted because he has getting that, particularly from people like Matt Comyn, who we know he's close to, they definitely talk a lot. And I think it's sometimes unclear to me who's influencing who, how much Chalmers is influencing Comyn, how much Comyn's influencing Chalmers. But it's definitely a live issue and one that, should be front and centre. And, when we're talking about tax reform at the roundtable next month. Yeah.
And Cosi, we should just say that as we've been recording on Friday morning, Matt Comyn's actually been announced as one of the attendees at the Business Council.
Okay.
He'll be invited along there by Jim Chalmers. So, as you said, the bromance continues.
Yes.
But I think it's encouraging, Cosi, that Chalmers is at least open to having this discussion. I mean, they've just won a big victory at the election. If ever there's going to be a time, it's at the start of this term when you're having all this roundtable productivity push, right?
That's the great hope. They've got a mandate. They've got a big majority, which gives them a bit of a mandate and probably a 6-year runway to achieve things. It's barring a miracle, there'll be a return for a third term. Yeah. So if you're ever going to do bold things, do them now. And it is really heartening that the Prime Minister and the Treasurer have said fixing productivity is, a big priority for them. But do you think, James, if we rewind back to when the Albanese government was first elected and they held that Job and Skills Summit and everyone turned up there thinking this is the dawn of a new era, and basically business walked away feeling like they got hoodwinked because the union movement got what they wanted and business got played off a break. How do you think business feels going into this roundtable? Do you think that they are convinced of the bona fides and that it will result in meaningful change, or do you think they're a bit sceptical because they were burned last time?
I think they're probably sceptical, and they're probably right to be. I mean, it's a 3-day summit. It's not like they're going to be sitting down with pieces of butcher's paper trying to brainstorm the policy for the next 20 years. It'll be well staged, managed, and I'm sure everyone's expecting that. And, there's 25 seats around the cabinet's table, or 24 seats. So, it's going to be a pretty select audience.
It is.
But I think business would be encouraged that we're having this discussion. All of a sudden, you can go out there and talk about tax reform and raise some ideas, and, politicians aren't going to cut you down for it or haul you in front of some sort of parliamentary inquiry. At least we can have the discussion at the moment. So, there's a sort of brief period where the metaphorical flowers are blooming. And my sense from Commons, the publication of this submission from the CBA and Common this week, my sense is that is a message to say we should take this seriously. This is a bit of an inflection point for the economy. If we don't take it seriously, we don't get a voice in it all. So, Yes, I think it's fair enough to be skeptical and a bit wary, maybe even a bit cynical, but we sort of got to get involved. And I think that's what business is doing. I don't know. Do you think that's right?
I do. And what do you think, there's two schools of thought going into this. One is, look, there's certain things the government will never countenance, so there's no point putting them up. You should sort of suggest things that you think have, a bit of a hope of consensus, kind of being formed and everyone agreeing to it. Or do you say, look, this is our opportunity. If we're going to be serious to fix the productivity, to fix the economy, we've got to be bold and you've got to go in there hard with big things.
Yeah. I think they're going in with big things. I mean, it would have been easy for the CBA to pick off a few smaller things in their submission, but instead they've sort of gone, change the GST, think about wealth taxes. I mean, talk about the two hard, imagine the politicking that would go around those two items, lifting the GST or broadening it and introducing some sort of wealth taxes. I mean, it'd be crazy, but they've at least put it on the table. So I think Comyn's view is that the economy is at a bit of an inflection point with AI, things like AI, the energy transition, housing. If we don't start to get this stuff right in the next few years, we're not going to get it right and we're just going to limp along. So, I hope the government sort of takes that and doesn't just try and, eke a long small target strategy. This is to your point, if you're ever going to do some bold reform, this is surely the moment.
Do we need more Matt Comyns in Australian public life?
Oh, that's a good question.
Or is one Matt enough?
Oh, look, I think I think there's lots of CEOs who care deeply about the country and have bigger ideas. I don't know if the climate's been right to speak up recently. The scrutiny and the populism has been pretty strong. So I think there's, it's hard enough running your own company as NAB might tell you this week without trying to fix the country too. But I think, it's good. It's great that we can have big debates. That's what we want to have, big debates that are open. So the CBA submission isn't just full of good ideas, but it's a bit of a symbol of it's possible to talk about this stuff and, make a great contribution to the debate.
Completely agree. Yep.
All right, Cosi, we'll come back after the break. There's a big moment in RBA history coming up next week. We'll be back to tell you all about it in a sec. Well, welcome back. If you want to know more about what we're talking about today and a whole lot more, AFR subscribers can sign up to the Chanticleer newsletter at join.afr.com/Chanticleer. Every Saturday morning, the newsletter pulls together the best Chanticleer columns from the week and delivers them straight to your inbox. Okay, Cosi, big week next week. It's always a big week. But Tuesday, we get the RBA minutes from that meeting where they shocked the world by keeping interest rates on hold. How good's this going to be?
Oh, I've got to say, last week, unless you really wanted interest rates cut, it was a great week for journalism when they surprised us all.
Yeah.
And it will be fascinating to get the minutes and to find out what was really said around that board table.
Yeah, and we had unemployment data this week. It was softer than expected. I wrote that the RBA suddenly might regret that decision in July. And once again, the markets are saying an August rate cut is guaranteed. They couldn't shock us again, could they?
Well, Michelle Bullock, the Reserve Bank governor, said that, they want to see another quarterly inflation report to feel very confident that cutting was the right thing. So, yes, we've had some jobless numbers that, sort of tilt the balance in favour of the rate cut, but we still need that quarterly inflation report, right?
Yeah.
You would think. And the market's clearly betting that there will be a rate cut next month because all indicators will suggest that's the right move. But, we've still got another data point to come through before I think we can be conclusive.
Yeah, Wednesday, July 30th, that June quarter CPI number comes out. All right, on Tuesday night, we've got another speech from poor old Jerome Pal. So he might use AI to write this one, I reckon, and just try and say as little as possible. And Thursday night, just watch out. The European Central Bank has a rates decision. Central bankers are always in the firing line, and this one will be important too.
Would be.
Well, Cosy, we love questions here on the Chanticleer podcast. This week, our question's from Tom. If you've got a question you want to send in, you can email us at chanticleer@afr.com. You can send us a question in audio form, or just record a voice memo on your phone and include your name and where you're from. Or on the bottom of all of our Chanticleer articles, there's a widget that allows you to ask questions, and we're getting plenty through there. And Tom's question came through there as well. And Tom asks, given that the dot-com bubble burst between 2000 and 2002, when I was just 2 to 4 years old, are there parallels between that period and the current AI hype cycle? In particular, the rapid run-up in valuations of potentially revolutionary tech stocks that may take longer to deliver real returns than the market currently expects. Well, Tom, that makes me feel very old, that you were only 2 years old back then.
I started journalism writing about the dot-com bubble. So, Tom, you're making me feel extremely old. And yes, there are definitely parallels. JT, what do you think?
Yeah, no, there are definitely parallels. And in fact, on some measures, the valuations now are higher. There was a great graph this week saying that if you take the top 10 companies on the S&P 500, now compared to the top 10 companies back in 2000, the top 10 now are actually more highly valued.
Wow.
I guess the difference, though, Cosy, is back in 2000, all those dot-com companies often had no revenue and definitely no profit. This time, that is a big difference this time, right?
Definitely. I remember writing about cash burn rates endlessly because that was how we knew which was the next dot-com company to go bust. And we're not writing about cash burn rates this time the way we were last time.
No, absolutely. But I was looking at Nvidia this week and I was counting the number of times it's hit a record high in the last 4 weeks. It's hit 14 record highs in the last 4 weeks. So there is a bubbly feel to this. I don't know if it's a bubble or not. They're making packets of profit as well, but Cosy, there's just a bubbly feel about it.
I think like all of these things, it reaches a point where there's a bit of a reset, right? You know, when you shake out the wannabes and the businesses that don't actually have a very strong underlying business model apart from, hey, we're doing AI. So, you know, there's a shakeout and that's what will happen. But the good companies will survive as they always do.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Well, Tom, thanks for your question. And Cosy, thanks for joining us on the Chanticleer podcast. You've been a star.
Oh, thanks, JT. I've really enjoyed it. Hopefully you ask me back one day.
Absolutely. We'll see you all next week. If you like the podcast and you want to hear more, consider sharing or giving the podcast a review as it helps other listeners find us. And don't forget to follow wherever you get your podcasts. At The Financial Review, we investigate the big stories about markets, business and power. For more, go to afr.com and you could subscribe to The Financial Review, the daily habit of successful people, at afr.com/subscribe. Chanticleer was hosted by me, James Thompson and Cosima Mariner, and it was produced by Alex Gow and Mandy Coolin. Our theme is by Alex Gow. Head of Premium Content is Fiona Buffini.
The Australian Financial Review.